Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real. This is the Abraxas brief, the latest Abraxas brief. And Birdie Num Num and Nipples for Men. I guess I'll just wait a second for people to see if they start populating the forum here at the Inner Sanctum of Gnosis Facebook group. Welcome, everybody, and it's great to see you. Always great to hang with people from the Inner Sanctum of Gnosis. You guys have been great. Your insights have been great. Your feedback's been great, and you certainly have been great at helping grow this show in the last year. Hey, Ian. Hi, Matthew. Hey, Brad. Hey, Neil. How's everybody else? Guillermo. ¿Cómo estás? So, again, welcome to the latest episode of the Abraxas brief, and in this episode we will briefly talk about the Gnostic Sophia, a central character in many of the Gnostic myths, and certainly a character that is very popular in today's modern esoterica. Again, it's been a while. I don't know if I should apologize, but hey, Brett, how you doing? Hello, Danielle. And yes, it's been a bit of a rough January, mainly because of the flu season, getting sick a bit, and of course the recent brutal cold snap. So everything's been a little bit disruptive, but it's good to be back here with the Abraxas brief. In fact, for some reason, it was so cold when we were really cold a couple of days ago. I think now we've had about a 70 degree turnaround. I decided I wanted to watch John Carpenter's The Thing. And I think it's because when I moved to this country as a kid, I remember watching John Carpenter's The Thing. I was living in the South here in the United States, and there's one scene where you've got Kurt Russell going, "We can't go out there, it's minus 40." And me living in the South going, "Oh, thank God I don't have to deal with that in my life. Don't have to move to the Antarctica." Well, I ended up dealing with that's. I do know what it feels to be in the Antarctica because it was even colder with the wind chill factor. But and of course, it's really one of my favorite science horror movies. John Carpenter's The Thing. I don't know if you could say it's Gnostic, but it has Kurt Russell, so that's awesome. And it does have the Gnostic toying with nihilism, existentialism, and that sort of paranoid, suffocating atmosphere that you find in a lot of the Gnostic works. I think The Thing is more of an allegory of the Cold War, and maybe that's why I watched it, because it seems the powers that be want us to get back to a Cold War and get that doomsday clock closer to midnight as we make enemies of the Russians. But that's neither here nor there. For John Carpenter, yes, They Live would be the ultimate, one of the top Gnostic movies. So maybe we should make John Carpenter another Gnostic saint along with Philip K. Dick. What do you guys think? I know Vance really likes Prince of Darkness, and I need to watch that again. It's been a long time since I've watched it. But hey, Matthew, how are you? But let's talk about Sophia. Let's briefly talk about Sophia in this Gnostic Abraxas brief. Yes, Birdie Num Num and Nipples for Men. So I guess we should start with finding out what exactly is wisdom. I mean, today we assume that wisdom is simply a gathering of, or a depository of knowledge that somebody holds in their head. That's what wise people are. But I think in ancient times it was more like a combination, a harmonious combination of different processes of the mind: logic, thinking, experience, intuition, prophecy, and all that, all working together and used well for the betterment of the tribe and the betterment of humanity and the betterment of the world. I think that's what what wisdom was for in those days. You didn't have to be old or even have that much experience. You simply had to be wise, as I just mentioned. And of course, most of the wisdom deities across the world are women, because women were in charge again of those intellectual reasoning, gathering of knowledge, responsibilities of the tribe. Of course, you've got Thoth, who's male, but for the most part, the wisdom deities were female. Very important. And then a lot of times, it should be mentioned that wisdom and reason, or logos and Sophia, are sometimes interchangeable. I think logos, though, is more of the creative aspect of a divinity or a person. It is the problem solving going forward, and the creation wisdom, not so much. But they are interchangeable. Philo of Alexandria seems to make it interchangeable in his works. And in fact, he sort of switches it around, and the wisdom figure becomes a male, because in those days we were, of course, you might say, moving out the female wisdom goddesses and replacing them with male wisdom or logos. But that's neither here nor there. So that's wisdom in a nutshell for you as we move forward. So, hey Dixie, how you doing? Glad you're here. So what? Let's talk about this. We are talking about the Gnostic Sophia. Here I am as I'm stalling. Let me take a drag of this jewel. So, the origins of Sophia, and of course, I would agree with Stephen Heller, who says that Sophia is, in a way, very original. She is very pioneering. There are things about Sophia you probably won't find in other cultures, even though the myth of Sophia in the Gnostic Gospels draws from different cultures. But she is rather unique in many ways, and we'll get to it. But and she comes from obviously two streams, the pagan stream and the Jewish stream. From the pagan stream, we do have, you might say, a vibe or a feature of these goddesses that go to the underworld. They go down into the chaos, and I guess we could say that represents the collective unconscious, a place that can be very dark, but there are insights, there are treasures there, and there is integration and healing. And of course, the obvious one would be the goddess Inanna. She goes to the underworld on her own mission, and in some of the myths, she is even crucified. It says that, but she goes to the underworld. Another goddess like that would be Persephone, who, of course, is kidnapped by the god Hades and ends up in the underworld and has to be half rescued by Demeter, and in some myths also helped by the goddess Hecate. But, and of course, what does this represent? This probably represents, again, the soul's high adventure across the heavens and the soul's plunge into the hologram that is matter from a Gnostic standpoint. And even Plato in his writings does refer to the soul as a female and the soul falling into matter. So these myths and the soul, of course, as it falls into matter, is a great epic into discovering its own wisdom and finding wisdom in this world as it plunges, and it is with these goddesses too. The other goddess too that is obvious would be, well, there's the Greek goddess Sophia, which was really, her characteristics aren't that close to the goddess Sophia or the Aeon Sophia in the Gnostic stories. But the goddess that is closer, and that might surprise you, would be the goddess of Athena, who also is she used to be one of my favorite goddesses as a kid. I really liked her because she was wise, she was bookish, yet she was a warrior. She could kick ass. She was just, it seemed to me she was a goddess of death. She encompassed so much, but ultimately she was a goddess of wisdom. And you might say, well, what does that doesn't seem anything like the Gnostic Sophia, but it does. I know the name Athena, as most scholars have said, is really based. It's like she was named after Athens or something like that. But it was Plato who said that her name meant the mind of God. And there you have a direct correlation to the Gnostic Sophia. After all, what is Sophia known as in the Gospels, whether in the Simonian legends where she turns into Helen, or even as Sophia Barbelo, or higher self, she is the first thought of God. She is forethought. She is the consciousness beginning to know itself and receiving and receiving the projections of the invisible spirit. So, and even more interesting too, or just as interesting, in Athena's birth, well, guess how that happens? Well, in her birth is that Zeus suddenly has a headache. He has this huge headache. Instead of taking Advil or whatever, he soldiers on, and boom, what comes out of his head? wisdom. Athena is born. So again, you have this metaphor, this vibe of the first thought of God. She is the closest thing to a thought of God, to being there with the divine. Even if it was Zeus, but again, these myths are always very symbolical and interchangeable. In some myths, Zeus is more like the demiurge. Excuse me. In other myths, Zeus is more like the god above God. So it really depends who your audience is or what you're trying to convey. So we have Athena there, and yes, Athena is a virgin goddess. I think with Artemis, she is the two virgin goddesses in the Greek pantheon, as far as I know. And it makes sense because these goddesses were, you might say, part of their duties was war, was hunting, was being out there. So they didn't have time. And of course, Athena, as mentioned, she is a god of reason, a goddess of the universities. So she's very busy. Thoth, the god of wisdom in Egypt, he was a single dude too. So I don't think she was saying, I know a lot of people, well, she's a virgin, she couldn't express her sexuality. No, I think that these gods are they are very busy, and they've got important things to do. They don't have time for a relationship. And the Gnostic Sophia too. I think even though she starts with a consort, and we'll get to that too, and then when she's in some of the myths, when she's redeemed, she returns to her consort. But for the most part, she is a solo heroine in her adventure. She's a soul's high adventure across the heavens and into the hologram of matter. So we see Athena, we see Zeus. I mean, no, we don't see Zeus. We see we did see Zeus, and a lot of goddesses and human mortals. Female mortals saw too much of Zeus because he was never asking for consent. But we see Nana, we see Persephone, and even in some myths, you see Hecate, as she's the one who's traveling the night in the underworld to help find Persephone. In others, we see, I think there is the myth of what's her name? Eurynome, yes, and that's by I think James Fraser collected this myth, and that is this goddess that comes out of the primordial nothing, and she is dancing in this myth, and she gives birth to a serpent monster called Athena, and her and this serpent begin dancing together, and they mate, and they have an egg. The egg breaks open, and there's a creation of the world, and so forth. And at one point, Eurynome and the serpent double crosses her, and she basically punishes it. In the account, also very much like the lady in the Old Testament in Genesis, putting her head down, her foot down onto the serpent and bashing its head open, but this one she kicks him out. So, but it has been brought to my attention that this is from Fraser, and the scholarship has been kind of discounted or whatever. But it's a beautiful myth, and you never know. So, and lastly, for the Greek myths, and of course in the chat, feel free to, when we get to the Q&A, tell me if I've missed any deities, these underworld chthonic goddesses. Yes, there are goddesses, of course, that already exist in the underworld, like the goddess Nyx or so forth. But we're talking about the deity that has to travel into the underworld, searching on a certain quest or becoming trapped. And of course, you can easily say that Alice in Alice Wonderland and Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz are drawing from the archetype of the goddess falling into the underworld. And Sophia is certainly one of them, as we'll get to when we get to the exact Gnostic myth in the account of the Gnostic Sophia. Oh, but again, moving on also to the tale, or the narrative is very close to that of the ambitious deity that falls from grace. And that we'll also get to Sophia. That is definitely part of the feature of the Gnostic Sophia, as again we will see very soon, but I'm trying to set the table here. The most obvious son would be Phaeton, and in one of the myths of Apollo, he's the son of the god Apollo, and he nags his dad to use his Porsche, well, not his Porsche, his chariot of fire, gets in it, loses control, and he falls. And of course, you've got Icarus too, who really wasn't a god, but it's a great tale of too much ambition, too high, and so forth. And Sophia certainly is this character, although she is female, which is remarkable because this is the sort of thing that for the Greeks only a great male figure would have accomplished, and a great lesson in pride that only usually men have to suffer from because men are so prideful. But Sophia is one of them too, and in fact, I would say. If you're not getting this now, Sophia is definitely the tale of Lucifer centuries before the sort of esoteric occult Lucifer came, or even the fall of Satan came by the first, second century. That was a tale, and that's why in many shows and many writers have called Sophia Luciferian, because she is a being of light that, because of her ambitions, falls down into the world, has to go. She's not destroyed, but she has to go through her own travails, like these underworld goddesses that I mentioned. So keep in mind Phaeton and Icarus for the Greek and pagan gods. Let's see, anybody saying anything? Joanna's saying Hindu Saraswati. Well, we'll definitely have to talk more about this goddess for sure. I'm not that familiar with the Hindu pantheon to really talk about. Mine is more Greco-Roman and so forth. That's my expertise, but I definitely want to expand more into Eastern goddesses. And of course, you'll be the first person I talk to about this, Joanna, even though we did cover it in our Trimorphic Paranoia last night, which should be out in about 10 days. We touched upon it briefly. So let's talk about the Jewish origins of Sophia. I mean, after all, the Zohar calls wisdom, or Hebrew Chokmah, calls her the bride of God. And why is that? Well, I think, let me back up. I know the other day some people were saying in Inner Sanctum of somewhere that Sophia, because again, being a Luciferian character, she transgresses. She is another one of those blame it on the chick characters. But it's not so much that, because again, Sophia is part of different avatars, and I should mention now that an aeon is, and this sometimes confuses people, but it wouldn't confuse ancient people, but an aeon is very much like the Uthras of the Mandeans. An aeon is both a personification, a time, or some sort of period of time, maybe not normal human time, and a place. An aeon is three different things and could be even more, have even more dimensions. An aeon is just beyond supreme. It is a personification, an ideal, and again, a time and a place. It can house its own universes and other gods and so forth. So Sophia is just one aeon inside these other aeons. And of course, you have Bar below, which is a supreme mother, or the Silence. She's called Silence of the Valentinians. And these are the more perfect beings. But Sophia is also the great story of fall, redemption, forgiveness, and getting it all back together. And I think that's a very noble story, very honorable, and in a way, and I want to get to this too, it was inevitable because she is wisdom, and wisdom just needed to know, just like these other gods. They had ambitions, they went too far, and they had to fall because they basically were disrupting the divine plan. So I don't see a Sophia as so much in a negative, orthodox Eve kind of way. Let's blame the woman. I see it again as well, she is a soul. She is us. She is us trapped in matter, and whether it's not, it's our fault. It is our responsibility. I think, and again, the Gnostics weren't just making this up. Again, as they drew from the pagan religions, they also drew from the Jewish tradition, and there is a rich wisdom tradition in Judaism. And in this tradition, as they were reading the scriptures and other tales, they were noticing that there was a personification of wisdom with God at the beginning of time, helping God, being part of the creation of the world and so forth. And they said, wait, this is obvious. Just orthodoxy keeps missing all these obvious things like the archons and so forth. Well, it looks like orthodoxy has missed that there is this very prime figure called wisdom that is with God, not Yahweh, but the supreme God, And suddenly this character is there helping, being part of creation. And then suddenly in some of the tales, she is lost with humanity. She is there with humanity. What happened? There must be a story here. So maybe wisdom fell. Maybe this is what happened. And the Gnostics, of course, did their own rabbinical exegesis and found these stories in the gaps. And that's one of the reasons they came up with wisdom. And the instances of wisdom scattered in the Old Testament they're really beautiful. In fact, I would like to read it for you. This is from the great Gnosticism by Stephen Heller. And of course, it is a signed copy. Very proud of it. One of my first books on Gnosticism, but Stefan, of course, has a great section on the Gnostic Sophia, and allow me to put my glasses on because I'm not getting any younger. You find wisdom in a lot of places, like the book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiasticus, the book of wisdom, the Song of Songs, and so forth. Doesn't Jesus say, I think in the Gospel of Luke, wisdom is known by her children? Anyway, Sophia, like many of the Gnostic ideas are in the Old Testament and New Testament and apocryphal and traditions and also the Gnostics saw these stories and found them. But for example, in book of Proverbs, chapter 8, it goes, the Lord possessed me from the beginning of his way, before his works of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or ever the earth was. Where there were no depths, I was brought forth. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the depth, I was there. So as you can see, this is an important character. You also find her in Ecclesiasticus, chapter 24, beautiful passage. I came out of the mouth of the Most High and covered the earth as a cloud. I dwelt in high places, and my throne is a cloudy pillar. I alone compass the circuit of the sky and walk in the bottom of the deep, in the waves of the sea and in all the earth, and in every people and nation. He created me from the beginning, before the world, and I shall never fail. Beautiful passage. And there are more. And of course, again, in some of the later passages, she's forlorn by the house on earth with the people and lost. And that's the great tale in Gnosticism, and obviously probably was once in Judaism, was wisdom is lost with us, and we must help wisdom as she helps us. And I would say it doesn't seem like it's working because I don't see humanity any wiser today. Something is failing, and it seems we are failing Sophia as much as we ask her to help us out. And that's a pity because she is there. She's lost with us. She is us. She is our sister. It even says that in one of the Gnostic Gospels, our sister Sophia. And we have not heeded her as species. And we're basically losing the battle to her tragic bastard son Yaldabaoth. But I'm getting ahead of myself and I'm waxing poetic here. How are you guys doing in the chat room? Nobody doing anything silly because of my negative remarks about where we're being. Yes, sunshine. Wisdom verses were co-opted for Jesus. That is true. There are some scholars who believe that, for example, the Gospel of Thomas was originally uttered by wisdom, by Sophia, and then later it was replaced by Jesus. I mentioned Philo of Alexandria, who had to switch wisdom and make him completely male, even though with these passages I write, Chokmah in those days was definitely female. Let's see, let me look at my notes here. Oh, here's another good one from, I forgot what this is, New International Version. I don't know if you guys want me to read wisdom literature all day, but Proverbs 9. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her young woman to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn here. So anyway, a lot of beautiful wisdom literature in the Old Testament and other places. So the Gnostics, again, they were drawing from these traditions, and they were That's how they create it with their stories, and they make sense to me. So let's get to the Gnostic Sophia. As much as I've been hinting and intimating and giving away the plot and so forth, let's get down to business to defeat the Huns. Oh, wait, that's from Milan. Okay, anyway. Okay, let's get down to business to getting to know the Gnostic Sophia. Mm, what is Sophia's story? Well, in the Gnostic myths, as many of you already know, it's really about God understanding itself, or the supreme consciousness becoming aware and creating this being called bar below or silence. And through this interaction, understanding its characteristics, these characteristics like mercy and perfection and even all these different characteristics which would become, of course, as I just mentioned, the aeons, these places, maybe alternative universes, these periods of time, these personification and personhood, and sort of flowing out from the interaction of bar below and the invisible spirit or the ultimate consciousness, or as the Valentinians called it, depth and silence. Depth being the male, silence being the female. And every Gnostic set had their own set of aeons and so forth. Sometimes they're not even characteristics; they're just very odd names that who knows what they mean, like Davideth or Elileth or whatever. So yeah, it has to have a T, so it sounds really cool. But a TH. But anyway, the mind of God is knowing itself. That's what it is. That is what creation is, and that's the primordial Gnostic creation. And at some point, wisdom is created, and that's when trouble is. Sophia, in many of the texts, she is the youngest of the aeons, whatever that means. I don't think whatever that is. I don't think she houses anything. She is just there. She has a consort, which sometimes is just called consort or beloved. And some of them, her consort is actually Christ, the salvific aeon or the personification of being saved, although it doesn't really save her this time because wisdom commits a infraction. And of course, we're going back to Lucifer and Phaeton and Icarus, that problem, that disruption, that rebellion in a very high place. But the reasons are different. We don't really know. And some of them she wants, the Valentinian ones, she sees up to the supreme light, to the invisible spirit, and Barbelo wants to know it. Her simply moving it disrupts the entire flow and harmony of the divine family. These pairs call these aeons, the syzygies, and this disruption calls her to fall. In other words, she wants to create without her consort. She doesn't give consent or ask for consent, not something you want to do today. And that causes, again, a disruption. In the Pistis Sophia, it's interesting. The Pistis Sophia, I think she begins singing or looking at the divine source, and another aeon, Authades, this sort of jerk aeon, decides to betray her, and he becomes jealous, and he uses her power to kick her out of the Pleroma, the eternal realm. But anyway, regardless of the reasons, the reason has to do with that this was almost, the dice was loaded from the start in the aeons, because as April de Connick said in her book, The Gnostic New Age, wisdom being wisdom was going to know. She had to know. That was her nature. It's not her fault. It's not blaming the woman or whatever. Wisdom was going to know because that is what wisdom does. So she was going to create what she saw around her. She was going to explore and find out what was going on because she is Sophia, and that's what wisdom does. And it's almost ironic that wisdom would be the cause of so much disruption and, in a way, destruction. And as the Gnostics said, the reason why God would go crazy and break apart or set in motion what would happen to the entire universe. I mean, what did Stephen Davis said? You can put the Gnostic story in one sentence. The Gnostic story is God went crazy and became us. How are we going to get sane and become God? Well, we got to find wisdom. We got to recover wisdom. So anyway, Sophia being Sophia, that's what caused the problem. and she is cast out of the pleroma or the treasury of light or the eternal realm, whatever you want to call it. Of course, that is, as some have called it, even Stephen Heller, this is what we call the Passion of Sophia. She is cast out of the pleroma and she goes through unbelievable pain and trauma and everything. I mean, she is suddenly alone in the chaos and the darkness of nothingness. And she is panicking, she is in pain, she is having, she's just having a huge trauma. And her trauma creates basically the building blocks of the universe or the multiverse. The pain and sorrow and everything sort of spreads out of her, and it creates that. And she continues to be being distraught. And this is more of the Valentinian one. But in these myths, they're all the same, even in the Sethi one, because of her sorrow, because of her pain. And that happens to us, right? So when we think we're wise and we hold things together, we start giving birth to some really bad worlds, and we start giving birth to some very, very bad aspects of ourselves. And that's what happens to Sophia. She becomes pregnant with her own dark emotions. And needless to say, she gives birth to, in the Sethian one, it's very specific. She has an abortion. She's pregnant, but then she miscarries, and her abortion is, surprise, the demiurge, Yaldabaoth, Yaldibaldi. And she tries to protect him because she's worried that the other aeons or that the pleroma will see, and she tries to protect her little baby. Maybe, well, I always think of the baby in Eraserhead, something like that. But obviously, the Gnostics portrayed him as the dragon and lion-headed monster who then suddenly takes some of Sophia's power, starts forming the universe, starts creating his archons, and here we are. And it's interesting because in the secret book of John, it does say that to create his archons, Yaldabaoth picks a consort, and his consort is his own madness. He makes love with his own madness. So you can see this human psychology from the very beginning, wisdom and so forth, and mating with your own madness and creating these terrible worlds, and it's all there. No wonder Jung thought that the Gnostics really had the secrets of the psyche, because all the Gnostic Gospels are, and I keep saying this, they're just the map of the human psyche. And as I keep showing, all these things are processes, mental diseases and so forth, ways for integration and wholeness. It's all there in the Gnostic Gospels, as strange as they are. So anyway, Sophia then is sort of redeemed, or she's forgiven, but she has to fix the world, the universe. She has to go to war with her son, Yaldibaldi. And being a being of pure information, which is what an aeon is, she has to find her own way, because Yaldibaldi is a being of pure, mostly matter soul. So she can't just use her supreme information to defeat him, because now he has stolen her power and he has created the rules down in this universe. She has to use information and her light to win the war, get back her power, and defeat his son. And here we are, we're still doing it. And of course, in some, not of course, how we say of course, in some of the tales, she is split. In fact, she's split in many of them. She has many avatars, even in the material world. Mary Magdalene, Eve, so forth. And in some of them, there is the higher version of herself, the truer version that is still there, goes up to the pleroma, and she more of a lower self has to stay down here. Again, think of the Old Testament and the two wisdoms, the one creating with God, the supreme being, and then the other one lost in the houses with the tribes of Israel. But this lower wisdom is often called Achamoth, or she's called the wisdom of death in the Gospel of Philip. In the Gospel of the Egyptians, it's interesting. She actually goes and she becomes the ruler of Hades. So we have sort of a Kali vibe here, where Sophia also becomes this dark goddess, even though she is here in the world of matter. In the second treatise of the Great Seth, she is called a whore. Now, a whore is basically, I think it's I think the term is prunikos, which is Greek for lewd one, and it actually means more of a lost soul. Or, again, last night when talking to Joanna, that's how it was. We're all whores in this world. Well, as long as we're down here in matter, we got to whore ourselves at work to survive, to do anything. It's a double bind, and we are selling ourselves. So is Sophia, so is Akama, so is the wisdom of death, and so forth. And and another side note too, in some of the Valentinian myths, she actually is the mother of Jesus and Satan. So she gives birth to Jesus and Satan. Probably later, third, fourth story, but it's fascinating because obviously the Cathars and the Mormons later on would borrow this Jesus and Satan being brothers. So they kind of left out the Sophia part. So how's everybody doing there? All right. Good comments. We'll get to the questions soon, guys. So what is the meaning of all this? Yay, look at all these great stories. Well, I think I've already given away some of the meaning, wisdom, but obviously an obvious one, and I guess this was the one that Stephen Heller mentioned, is that Sophia is a great story of when we try to use one faculty of our mind without using the other. When we try to go by pure logic instead of depending on our intuition or our imagination, or we try to go too much with our imagination or our emotions and we don't lean on our logic or our other parts of the intellect. In other words, for us to be complete human beings, we have to be using all capacities of our brain. And that is true high wisdom. So that's a great lesson in the story of Sophia. Sophia, as I mentioned, Sophia is a great story, or the great representation of the soul falling into the hologram of matter, or the soul's high adventure through the heavens. She is our sister. She is us as much as the demiurge. For all his bad qualities, he is our brother too. And here we are, stuck in the middle with you and everyone else. Wisdom is also another tale. Is wisdom is experience. I mean, wisdom is knowledge without experience. What happened? She had to experience. She had to know. She had to do these things, but she didn't have the experience. So she had to go through all these horrors to really fulfill ourselves. I mean, let's be realistic. I'm sure we've all met wise people, and people with wisdom have suffered a lot and they have gone through a lot. That's what wise people do. And Sophia simply needed to do that. It's just the way it is. I mean, you need that experience. So that's the other great lesson in the story of Sophia. I've always thought too, sometimes it's sort of a Hellenistic koan. How could the wisdom of God fail? You know, the sound of one hand clapping. Well, it's a good koan. It's a good meditation. And when you know this, you probably won't be able to tell me, and you'll probably be on another level. So these are the great stories that we see about, or lessons that we have in wisdom. Let me know if you see, and let me know if you have any of your own. I'd love for you to share them with me. I like what Hui, I don't think he's in the chat room, said. He said that ultimately wisdom is addicted to this world. She may want to return all of her incarnations to the Pleroma. She may want to bring all her children in divine spark, but she is also addicted to this world. She is concerned for her son, and as much as she might play that she wants things to get better, she's going to play it, and she's very schizophrenic, and like the origins of the world, where she splits off into Pistis and Sophia. It seems she wants to continue these things. So in a way, we need to help wisdom regain her sanity so that she can help the Supreme God regain his sanity. If not, she's going to stay down here with us, and here we are. And I mentioned humanity seems, after all these centuries and all these millennia, seems as lost it forever, doesn't seem any wiser, and doesn't seem to have any more Sophia. In fact, less Sophia than ever before. So it does, in a way, it does seem hopeless. So I don't know what to say. I wish I had better news, but when you look around us, I see there may be an interest in Sophia out there in esoteric circles, but when it comes to culture at large, there seems to be less and less wisdom. But here I am trying to at least spread a little wisdom as I trying to gain wisdom as I get older and I gain more gnosis and so forth. So I hope you are too. Okay, I think I've gone through all my notes. I think I hit on anything. I hope I don't forget because I always hate. Then I'll be walking the dogs tomorrow, and I'll do my Samuel Jackson. Mother, I forgot to tell him this, but I think I covered it all. Again, I want to be as brief as possible, even though I've already killed 40 minutes. So why don't we get to the Q&A for members of the Inner Sanctum of Gnosis, and of course, this will be the full show. Abraxas brief will be posted with the Q&A for patrons and people at the Archive of Past Shows, and of course people at the Inner Sanctum will get a copy as soon as I hit the end live video. And but thanks for being here, and for those out here, please continue to support. As I mentioned in the last show, this has been 2018 was the best year for Aeon Byte in all metrics. I think the support is also starting to go up big time. I think it's symbiotic. I'm creating more. You're supporting more. You're giving me great feedback in the Inner Sanctum of Gnosis, great insights. So we're all feeding off of each other. So if you can, for you out there, please support any way you can. Become a Patreon, member of the Archer Shows, share. I mean, if I was thinking if only 10% of the tens of thousands of people who listen to Aeon Byte every month would support, if only 10%, then I could increase by, I don't know, 3 times the content in different ways. And I have really good ideas for some videos and some other things and great stuff. But if you can support, I can continue doing this. And either way, no matter what happens, I will continue doing this because, as I said, I am trying to do my part in making sure that wisdom isn't so addicted and wisdom can go home and take us all home. So thank you those who are here, and now we will go to the Q&A at the Inner Sanctum of Gnosis Facebook group.